to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the founder of Favorite Daughter Media and is the author of the nonfiction book, Open This Book, The Art of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders. Her name is Sara Lohse, and here's my interview with Sara. Sara Lohse, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. I am the president of Favorite Daughter Media. So I'm actually a podcast coach and producer, and I focus on helping people learn how to tell stories and how to embrace their personal stories and use them to become thought leaders in their space. And that's something that I've been very passionate about for a while. So it's been a lot of fun to actually get to do that for a living.
Without spoiling too much of your upcoming book, which will be titled Open This Book, that's a good title, by the way.
But
The
thank
Art
you.
of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders. What is it about, and do you have a time frame for when the book will be released?
I actually just announced yesterday that I'm releasing the book on April 25th. And it is kind of it's a business development slash memoir slash journal type of book. It's very unique, but it's really rooted in the power of storytelling. So it walks through why stories are so important in building connections with other people, which is something that as thought leaders is really important to us. We want to engage an audience and really have them connect with us on a personal level. So I talk about how to tell stories, how to figure out where the value lies in our stories, because with the 24/7 news cycle that we live in, people seem to think that if they don't have a story that's headline worthy, they don't have a story that matters. So trying to break out of that mindset and get everybody more comfortable with telling their stories and doing it in a way that is compelling and is going to make a difference in somebody else's life. So explains that. And then I use my own stories to kind of explain those concepts in a way that's really relatable and accessible. And then I offer some writing prompts and journal exercises so that you can actively start figuring out your stories and how to tell them.
You were interviewed for the financial podcast Stacking Benjamins about of something that was not really related to finance. It was about a bad tattoo.
Yes, I
How did
was.
that interview come about, and how did it influence your book?
Yeah, that's actually the first story that I tell is actually that story because it has had so much impact on my life in ways I never expected. But I got a really bad tattoo when I was on a trip to Ireland, a solo trip, just a way to kind of try to find myself. And I was at a podcast conference, a podcast movement in Nashville back in, I want to say 2021. And Joe Saul-Sehy of Stacking Benjamins was there. At the time, I was working in finance and I was producing a podcast for the CEO of the financial planning firm I worked for. And I really wanted to get him as a guest on Stacking Benjamins. So I finally, after 3 days of casually stalking Joe, I finally met him and tried to pitch the host of that podcast to be a guest on Stacking Benjamins. And what he said to me was, I don't need an expert. I need someone with a cool story. And I didn't want the conversation to just end there. I wanted to continue talking to him and seeing how I could get Eric on the show. So I just came out with, do you want to hear about the time I got a tattoo of a penis while I was in Ireland? And he did want to hear it. And he just loved the story and how I told it. So he actually had me go on the show and tell that story. And he had me tell it in a way that sort of fit into the finance piece of it. I mean, it led to a lot of really daring decisions and changing my career, increasing my income. So we tied the money piece into it. But it really just was almost turning what I would consider just a silly story I tell at a bar into this self-discovery journey that I went on. And it really changed my perspective about our personal stories and how we tell them. And it put me on this path to really hone in on storytelling. And Joe has been an amazing friend since then. He actually wrote the foreword for my book, which I'm really excited about. And it's just really proved my now mission of everybody has a story. You just have to know how to tell it.
Joe Solsei, who's one of the hosts of the Stacking Benjamins podcast, wrote the foreword for your book.
Mhm.
What was it like to work with Joel on your book? Now, I understand that he wrote just the foreword of it.
Yes, he wrote the foreword. Uh, he he's an amazing human being. I absolutely adore and respect him. And we've been able to work together a few times. It started with me being a guest on his podcast, and he's come on my podcast since to kind of give his side to what turned into this ridiculous story and book and everything, kind of give his side to how that happened. So it's a lot of fun to be able to work with him, and I learned so much about how to be a good interviewer, how to be a good podcaster, just how to be a good storyteller. I learned it all from him. So I was so grateful when he agreed to write the foreword, and he had just the kindest words to say. So it's definitely something that has meant a lot to me. And I, it makes me just really grateful that I've had these opportunities.
How long did it take you to write your book, and what were the easiest and most difficult parts of writing a book for you?
It's funny you asked that because yesterday I announced that I would be releasing the book on April 25th. As soon as I did that, I started rewriting the entire book. I started this process probably in April of 2023. So now it's April of 2024. So it was about a year-long process, but it was not a straight line at all. It was changing my mind and thinking I have no business writing a book. It was being ready to publish and then realizing this book is crap. I got to rewrite it. And even just up to yesterday, and I was up until 3 o'clock this morning, just rewriting pieces that either have changed that I wrote maybe a year ago and I feel differently about, or just things that I read back and I'm like, oh, I don't even like that. I'm going to rewrite it. So I think there's a quote that art is never finished, only abandoned. And that is definitely relatable when it comes to writing a book because there's always things that you want to change. So I want to say the easiest part was the stories that I told because they come so naturally to me and the writing itself because I've been a writer my whole life. But the hardest part is just getting past that imposter syndrome of I'm 28 years old and I'm writing what could almost be considered a memoir and just being willing to put this project that is so close to my heart out into the world and allowing people to scrutinize it and just hoping that it has a positive impact.
What you I'm gonna kind of go into a conversational tone that I usually don't go into in my podcast interviews. What you said about rewriting your book right up until right before it's published sounds like a huge mistake I made with my first book, Lady in the Fast Lane. I made about 3 dozen or more mistakes with that one, so I hope your book turns out better than mine did.
I hope so, but I appreciate it. I definitely made this is my first time publishing a book for myself. I've published ebooks, I've published articles, blogs, and all of that, but this is the first time publishing a book, and I give so much credit to my publisher, Vince Warnock, for not hating me for all of the times that I just changed my mind and flip-flop, and my illustrator, Jasmine Designs, for not just quitting when I told her I need her to redo the whole cover because I rewrote the back of it and now it's longer and everything needs to be redone. So I don't know if it was a mistake to rewrite it. I feel really good about the changes that I made, and it really just made me more excited to launch the book later this month.
You mentioned your publisher is Vince Warnock. Is he an independent publisher? Does he work for a hybrid press, or does he work for either an imprint of a large traditional publisher or a small traditional press?
He owns ATG Publishing, which is out of New Zealand and Australia. I believe it's like a hybrid model. This isn't something where I sent a manuscript off to a bunch of publishers and it got picked up. It is me hiring him. So I hired him to help me publish the book, and he helped me with getting everything written and formatted, and um, making sure that it gets put into Amazon and Ingram Spark and all of the publishing platforms correctly. So I want to say that's a hybrid method. I don't think it's completely self-published, but he has made the whole journey and the whole experience so much easier than having to go it alone.
Your company is called Favorite Daughter Media, and I love the name of that company, by the way.
Why, thank
What
you. My sister does
services
not.
does Favorite Daughter Media provide, and what types of clients does your company serve?
Yeah, so with Favorite Daughter Media, I work with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, anybody who really wants to spread a message or grow a personal brand or a professional brand. And I specialize in doing so through podcasting. So I am a podcast producer. I have a second company with my partner, Larry Roberts, called Branded Media, and we're just a branded podcast production agency. So we talk to business owners who want to find more unique and fun ways to not only reach an audience, but really connect with an audience. And we design and build a podcast that will really do exactly what they're looking to do. And we produce it for them and teach them how to be a good podcast host and how to interview and all of that. So we're coaches and producers all within the podcasting space.
What is a thought leader? Since your book, the subtitle of it's The Art of Storytelling for Aspiring Thought Leaders. What is a thought leader, and how can one become a thought leader that gets noticed?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I consider a thought leader anybody who is just willing to put new ideas and new perspectives into the world. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions with thought leadership, and it can be confused with things like influencers. And this is very much an influencer culture that we're living in. So I think with an influencer, the whole idea is to stop you from scrolling and to notice something that they're wearing or something that they're doing. But with thought leadership, it's more about getting them to stop and listen. So if you have just a unique take on something, if you have a story that can teach something to others, to be a thought leader, you really just have to start spreading those stories and start telling them, as Austin Kleon says, show your work. So I think of thought leadership just as anyone putting ideas into the world. So that can be content creators, podcasters, authors, speakers. And I am all four of those things. So as long as you're putting out some kind of content that has new ideas and perspectives, I would consider you a thought leader.
Why is storytelling important, and how can one find value in one's own personal stories?
Storytelling is so important. Storytelling has been the bedrock of humanity for as long as civilization has existed. Even before we had languages, we had cave paintings on walls, and those were meant to tell a story. Storytelling is how we connect with other people, and connections come from shared experiences. So when you share your own stories and you share where you've been, where you've come from and where you've been, people hear themselves in your story. People can say, "Oh, I've been through that. This person understands me." So if you were to say you're speaking at a conference and all you're doing is spreading information and you're just giving facts and figures, it might be important information, but it's not going to cause any connection. You're not going to connect with anybody. You're not going to compel anybody to pay attention. So having stories and leading with that is going to really connect and get people to pay attention. So if you want if you want attention, if you want to be a thought leader that people do recognize and do respect and listen to, you have to lead with those stories because it's honestly the only part that we can't Google. If you're just leading with information, we can look it up. We don't really need you, but no one can Google your story. No one can Google your experience, and no one can take it away. So I think when you really focus on your stories and just looking at the everyday stories, the turning points in your life, the times that really changed your perspective, and you just think about what happened in those moments and what you learned and what you changed, those pieces of memory are going to be the value that your story can offer.
My final question for this interview: what is your best advice for people who want to tell their own stories but aren't completely comfortable doing so?
It's a really good question. Honestly, I would say just do it. It is something that is uncomfortable and it's meant to be uncomfortable. Very few people actually feel comfortable getting onto a stage and just talking. But it's like anything else that you do, it takes practice. So start small, start with something like content creation, putting out little nuggets of wisdom on your social media. Start with maybe something like podcast guesting where you're telling just one or two stories in a short amount of time. Don't dive right into a TED Talk. Just take it day by day. And as you get more comfortable and more experienced, your stages are going to get bigger. But you can't grow as a thought leader, you can't grow as a speaker if you don't start. So just take that leap. It's going to be scary, but if you have something worth telling, you owe it to people to tell it.
Okay, did I ask you the question, why is storytelling important and how can one find value in one's own personal stories?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sara, you were an amazing guest. I thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sara was an amazing guest, and it's amazing how a single podcast interview can launch an entire career. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@Apollo Papyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.